Planning a fishing trip shouldn't feel like a full-time job. With FishingBooker.com, you can find and book the perfect fishing trip within minutes. FishingBooker.com connects you with trusted fishing captains around the world. Booking is fast, easy, and secure, with access to verified customer reviews, loyalty rewards, and around-the-clock customer support. Everything you need to book with confidence is in one place. So head to FishingBooker.com and start planning your next fishing adventure today.
Now at McDonald's, a McDouble is $2.50, so you can get your gym gains on, or just get lunch for only $2.50. Get more value on the under $3 menu.
Limited time only. Prices and participation may vary. Prices may be higher for delivery.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Join Justin Townsend and the Harvesting Nature crew as they explore the world of cooking wild fish and game while sharing recipes, tips, tricks, and lessons learned from their pursuit of wild food. We sure hope you ate before the show, 'cause you're gonna leave hungry. This is the Wild Fish and Game Podcast.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Harvesting Nature's Wild Fishing Game Podcast. Got your host here, Justin Townsend, and today I have a very special guest with us. He just joined us as a new field staff writer, and looking forward to chatting with him today. He hails from the great state of Texas, and we're going to chat through a bit about a book he wrote, which we'll introduce here in a moment, which I think you're going to enjoy the conversation. It kind of plays into our broader conversation that we've been having around not just recipes and cooking, but looking at wild food and food really holistically from some different lenses. And so we'll dive into that here in just a moment. But before we get into that, Blake, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, introduce yourself, and then kind of where you are and how you got to where you are at this current point?
Yeah, absolutely. First, I want to say thanks for having me on. I'm happy to talk about the book, happy to get it out. I think it's kind of an important topic, especially among hunters and especially among the general population. But I was born and raised in Southeast Texas. I have, I think, kind of an interesting split. Like I spent most of my time growing up splitting time between Deep East Texas cattle ranching and then growing up here just south of the big city of Houston, which I feel like gave me a lot of different perspectives on things. Because, I grew up, I had a lot of vegan and vegetarian friends. My wife was vegetarian for 9 years, but then also I grew up, working cattle and spending time at rodeos and the whole kind of opposite lifestyle of that, which I feel like gave me a lot of different perspectives that I appreciated growing up and I appreciate now that I'm older. But that's kind of what got me to write the book, was just seeing the conflicts on both sides and one side not quite understanding the other, which I think, especially with hunters and vegans, if they ever sat down and talked, I think they'd find they have a lot more in common than they believe. And that goes, and I think there's a lot of people on the vegetarian and vegan side that know that, and I think there's a lot of hunters that know that, but I would say the majority on either side does not. And like I said, so I grew up hunting East Texas, which is not known for great deer hunting, so I had a lot of time sitting in deer blinds, reflecting more than anything else. And that's kind of where a lot of this stuff came from, was just those, kind of sits waiting for deer, waiting for some kind of movement, and spending hours just sitting there, hunting and thinking. Kind of over time is just an amalgamation of all that time spent together that kind of put all this in my head and kind of helped me think back and forth and try to think of opposing views and talking to people. And when I got back home, to the more, city side of people, that really kind of put me here where I am today. And
what role does food kind of play in your life now outside writing?
Well, it's incredibly important to me. My grandmother, and I think a lot of grandmothers, food is kind of love, right? Like that's, you spend like holidays, we're not allowed to do anything at my grandmother's until she cooks breakfast. That's an important thing. So I think just having that instilled in me as a young child, even as I grew up, when I want to do something nice for my wife, my first go-to is like, okay, she loves Asian food, so I can wrap something up around this. I can make her a great dinner. Or even my kids, like one of the things my son loves more than anything is fajitas, right? So like when a reward for something. He does something good grades or whatever. Like that's usually a fajita night. Like it's just a pivotal part of our life that like we tend to show like having people over. That's most of our social gatherings are wrapped around like smoked meats or grilled meats or something like that. It tends to wrap itself around most of my social life, and especially in the day to day.
That's awesome. And what kind of led you down that path of like re-examining anything outside those conversations? There's like a moment or anything that triggered it to be like, you know what, I want to dive deeper on the topic of the ethics of killing.
So I think it's a lot of things, but one of the things that really made me kind of reconsider some things and really made me want to dive a bit deeper. I'm also an amateur strongman competitor. I'm not sure if you're aware of that sport, but move a lot of heavy weight, and we eat a whole lot of food, especially a whole lot of protein. I'm 6 foot and 300 pounds, and it's the one place in my life when I take a group picture, I'm usually the one on my tiptoes trying not to look small. It's a bunch of big people. So there are some vegan athletes and stuff out there, especially in that world too, that I was friends with and on coaching teams with and stuff like that. So talking with them, knowing like, this is the amount of calories I have and this is, what I do to get it. And then kind of looking at like points in my life where, one from a cost effective standpoint and a standpoint of accessibility, I was eating 3-4 pounds of ground beef a day to try to get enough protein in.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's miserable. It's people always go around. They're like, oh, it's cool. You get to eat whatever you want. Like you don't. You get to eat as much as you want, but then you have to eat more than that all the time.
And then you have to burn. You have to burn a lot, right?
Well, you just do through working out.
Yeah.
You have 2-hour gym sessions a few times a week. There was a point I was eating around 5,500 to 6,000 calories a day. And every meal was miserable about 3/4 of the way through it. I was full and didn't want to eat anymore. But if I didn't push myself to eat those extra calories, I was still losing weight. Like I was working so hard, I was stuffing myself beyond what I wanted to eat. And I had to do that in order just to maintain the weight that I was at.
Did you ever like, as you consume that many, you go to like, for instance, you go to like eat Chinese food or something, like an Asian food, and you like fill yourself up with rice and vegetables and broth and all that stuff, and then a couple hours later you're like, oh man, I'm kind of like hungry again. Did you ever hit that because your body was just kind of in overdrive?
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of depends on how you schedule your training too. Like that's part of it. If you train early in the morning, it usually is a little better to eat more normally throughout the day. But if you train like midday, you don't want to really eat all morning and you're stuffing yourself. And then after you train, your body's starving for calories. And then you really want to go into it, But it also depends on, we're real particular, like, because we have to get enough protein in. So like that kind of hungry feeling generally comes from a lot of like fast carbs that you're eating and that digest quickly. And then you get hungry again. We're eating upwards of, 300, 350, 400 grams of protein. It doesn't digest quickly. And you're full a lot.
Wow. Okay. Well, did it lead you to examine kind of where your protein was coming from and kind of like where those calories were coming from?
Yeah, and that's kind of one of the big things that pushed it is, again, to save money and even trying to cut weight specifically. So your protein intake doesn't really change too often. You kind of cut the other macronutrients like fat and carbs to lose weight. So I was eating a lot of turkey. So I was eating 3-4 pounds of turkey a day. And then what struck me was eating buffalo wings. I was like, man, there's a whole slew of chickens on this plate. They only got so many cuts you can take from. And then I started thinking about it, and I was like, man, like when it comes to especially like, poultry, the kill count versus the calorie count really isn't that great. To get the meat and the protein you need, you're really moving through a lot of animals quickly. And that was probably among one of the initial thoughts where I started thinking in like kill count to calorie count. Is kind of where that came from, is when I was trying to cut weight and kind of focus more on lean chicken, lean turkey, and things like that.
Have you ever involved sort of wild game or fish in the aspect of this? Does it play a role?
Yeah, I'm very busy in my day job, so I don't get to hunt as much as I would like. It typically, maybe a couple of deer a year, and these are East Texas deer, so field dressing like 100 pounds. So with the amount of protein I eat, I don't have enough to last me very long.
You would need a lot of deer, a lot of elk.
Yeah, something. But it's very lean and very high protein. It's even better than chicken. And the beautiful thing about red meat too is it has a lot of micronutrients that you don't find in white meat. So I would try to save my wild game for when I was trying to like lose weight and body fat, and I would try to focus it there because it's, obvious. It's, people say it and it's very true, and I don't think people quite understand it. It's the healthiest meat that's out there is red meat, wild game. I mean, it's really tough to beat.
Super superb meat. Before we start diving into kind of some of the core thoughts of the book here, I did want to ask you, like, as you wrote and put this book together, did any of your views on food kind of change as you were writing it? Did you have anything that evolved or perspectives that differed?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say when you look deeper, you find things you didn't want to find, because I think everybody has a bias with everything they do, right? Like it's human nature. You can't beat your bias, right? And one of the things that threw me for a loop is I've in the back of my mind said for years, like, and I'm sure you've heard this too, right? Like all the ground nesting birds and stuff like that gets, killed through the harvest, like vegetarians, like their hands aren't clean either, right? But then you start digging a little deeper and you're like, yeah, well, 60% of all those harvests go to feeding beef cattle.
Yep.
So that was one thing where I was like, oh man, well, I didn't think about that. So it made me really reconsider the kind of fruit vegetable aspect and what has better harvesting dynamics and how you can wrap yourself around trying to reduce the kill count of the food you eat.
Man, I picked up right out of college. Geez, and this has been over a decade ago. Coming out of actually more than that. Don't think about it, doing my math. Picked up, Michael Pollan's The Omnivore's Dilemma, and I think that was really like my first dive into kind of examining the industrial food system and kind of like, whoa. And, I grew up, like I told you, in southeastern Oklahoma, and I grew up in an agriculture family and was very much a participant in the process, but like on a small scale range. And people do what they do to survive, and there's definitely, a need for, I think there has been a growing progression of the industrialization of our food system for a long time, probably since, like, I would argue the late 1800s. But as that has ramped up, as with any industrialization, has come a lot of, I think, sacrifices, and those both to the consumer, maybe oftentimes inadvertently, and then the environment be the other one. And, we've seen numerous, like, examples of environmental catastrophes as a result of it, but there's some truths, like you mentioned, that we don't really peel back the layers on and examine, and it's one of those you cover it, and we're going to dive a little bit more into it, but that's like that kind of understanding of, like, if I'm not a participant, it's not my place. Right. I didn't play into that, so we'll save that. But I definitely want to talk about that, because it's a very interesting conversation that I myself have had numerous times as well. Let's dive in kind of with one of your first core theses here, and I want to look at it through kind of your lens and let you lay out kind of the way you think about it. But the whole topic of, like, eating requires death. So can you kind of, like, expound upon that?
Yeah, absolutely. So it starts off with what we just mentioned, and to say it probably more clear is just living requires death. Like, that's the cost of life. Whether it's the neighborhood you lived in and the animals eradicated to build it, whether it's the food you eat and the harvest kills that come from eating the vegetables, whether it's the land required for your organic foods, whatever it is, one cannot live without the death of another. It's just an ugly truth of the world we live in. And I think it's important for all of us to understand that, right? Like, a lot of people discuss, reducing waste and for the environment. And I don't even think that's the most important reason to do it. Frankly, I think the most important reason to do it is because we have so much in excess, especially in 2026, that we should have a better utilization of it, right? Like, it goes a long way, even from a business standpoint of price reduction, supply and demand, and everything that gets wrapped around that. If we reduce waste, we can have a better world, better economy, better lot of things, right? And I think that's kind of the key element there is there's nothing you can do that's not at the expense of something else to live. And the more that you come to terms with that, and the more that you recognize that fact and don't try to hide from it, the more you can make little changes that have impacts in the world.
Yeah, I can't agree with you more. And I think about it from the perspective, and I've always talked about this sort of like as we frame, hunting and fishing and foraging and even just general consumption of like, as you start to really consciously think about kind of what you're eating, where your food comes from, and like your goals to live and eat by, you start to reveal and have kind of some revelations around it. I think first off, like the average person wastes between 200 and 400 pounds of food per year.
Yeah.
Which is just like staggering. It's a staggering amount of food. And we think that there's places on this earth where people don't get access to that much food, on a yearly basis, which is wild. And sort of with all that said, anything that you eat, like you said, requires that sort of like natural impact. Not that the act of eating itself is not unnatural, but like it's beyond just like, hey, let me pick this up and I'm gonna pour a box of cereal into a bowl and pour the milk in there. Like each of those things, say your cereal has 15 ingredients and your milk has one ingredient, hopefully, and then you're mixing those things together. Like they each have their own pathway and origin in order to come, and each has its own impact on sort of like the natural world and even the industrial world, the human world, everything. But I always kind of talk about it in a wild game standpoint of like when we talk about sort of like introducing new hunters and the concept of death and killing and the consumption of food is it that unto itself is an energy transfer of like you're taking the energy of the animal that existed, that it pulled from the ground or its natural environment, and you're now a consumer of it. And so doing so sort of like responsibly becomes that like your role in that kind of concept of eating requires death, because for a lot of people it's very new concept.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I have in the book too is people forget that we're on the same playing field, right? Like we're animals just like they are. We try to remove ourselves from that because we think of ourselves as highly intelligent and able to influence our world much better than animals are. But that doesn't remove us from the fact that we're the same thing. We have the same needs as a predator. We have the same needs as a prey, right? Like we have to come to terms with we want to exist, and there's a cost for that existence to happen, just like there is for anything else.
Why do you think people kind of resist that idea, that thought that it does in fact require death, and that we do play such a huge role in the process?
I think it probably gets rejected because we are superiorly special. Like that's what we all think about ourselves, right? Like we're different. We're not like everything else. And I think that's kind of just the especially because of the tribal nature of humans, we tend to think that, this is us and that's them. Like that's just our natural wiring.
A bit of exceptionalism going on.
Yeah, for sure.
What do you think what better helps people understand the concept of like food in terms of clean food versus violent food, like I guess in the way in which it's produced? Right.
Well, I think the important thing for people to know is just what happens. Like, right, there's a portion of the book too where it talks about like buying a quarter of beef from a local farmer, but actually going to the processing unit and watching them break it down. Watch the process. Like understand what it looks like, so you can again understand the cost.
Yeah,
because it's clean doesn't exist. It's all violent, right? Like it's a world of violence that you can't escape, no matter how bad you would like to. So the right thing in my mind is to come to terms with that violence and making sure that when you do that energy transfer, it's as efficient as possible, so you can do it the least amount possible. And I think that's where people get off track, is they remove themselves from that violence and just pretend it doesn't exist, right? They're an ostrich with their head in the sand.
That's fair. Another concept that you bring up is like the modern life hides behind the distance. So what does that distance actually look like kind of in practice?
Yeah, so there's a passage in the book about this where people feel very confident in their knowledge, that have no knowledge on the subject at all based off what they've seen through their phone screen or their computer or YouTube or what have you. And just one specific instance, and I'm sure you've probably seen this on Instagram or YouTube as well, of people getting upset at a cameraman on a video watching a predator kill prey, where they're like, "Yeah, why didn't you intervene? Why didn't you stop it? Why didn't you do something to help that innocent creature?" Which I think speaks a lot in terms of, like, you only see that through the screen, but what you wouldn't see is the predator starving to death off screen from not eating, which is a much more brutal and long death. It just depends on what you look at as to what you're going to see. So that's where that kind of glass wall of modern life comes in. When you watch it through your TV, when you watch it out of a window, when you watch it through a glass at a zoo, you get such a small, picturesque version of what nature is that you don't fully understand the day-to-day cost that everything has to be there.
Yeah, and it's wild because you think through that, and the majority of people don't. Like we just discussed, like the majority of people aren't participants, so they're not seeing that. They see the end result, and they don't see the beginning of, like, you think of, ironically, I'm going to bring this up, and this is probably the first time ever, you think of, like, PETA's plan to, like, project the image of the animal, to, like, humanize it, to make it, like, cute and cuddly, and be like, this is part of the world, don't eat this, I don't know why in that moment my mind drifts towards actually the Chick-fil-A eat more chicken signs with the cow versus the PETA sign, but whatever. That's for me to hash out later. As I go through that thought, looking at just the way people go, it seems there's almost kind of like an ability to pull yourself away from it, and have a feel of, like, moral relief from it, to be like, oh, like, I'm not as part of it, which is interesting. I don't know. Why do you think people sort of, like, feel that moral relief, maybe? Where does that come from?
Well, I think that has a name. It's called a delusion. And I think that's where it all comes from. I think you don't get your hands dirty. It's like hiring an assassin and being like, well, I didn't kill that person. That's exactly the same workflow, right? People don't want to feel bad, and we don't have enough to worry about in this day and age. Current politics notwithstanding, right? Like, everybody finds a million reasons to be upset about something, but at the end of the day, the world's still pretty good. Yeah. Frankly, I turn off the news and my life is great. Just on the regular day to day. But I think people just think if they don't know about if they don't know about it and they don't look into it, they don't feel responsible for it. Because if you don't know about it and you don't do anything about it, well, you didn't do anything wrong, right? Like, they can remove themselves from the thoughts and remove themselves from what's going on, and then they don't have to feel any moral obligation to how they treat anything. But it gives them a moral high ground to stand on and be like, well, I don't do this or I don't do that. Rather, this or that is right or wrong.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times, that can change situationally, person to person, like what you have to do in order to get by or to survive. And, there's like your socioeconomic status is going to depend, I think, largely where you find yourself in that role or in that concept, and really in that model of distance as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I grew up without a lot of money, and my hometown, there were not any vegetarians, right? If we ate anything, it was probably Hamburger Helper and hot dogs, right?
Yeah,
that was the cheap way to eat.
Shoot, I grew up on bologna sandwiches and ramen dinners, we're not talking about nice restaurant ramens either. We're just talking about packages.
No, that's it. My wife questions it, but that's the one thing I couldn't let go. Is just one of my favorite things in the world is bologna, American cheese, and yellow mustard on white bread. That's, in my opinion, the best sandwich available. I don't care how fancy you make it; it's hard to beat that.
I have trouble passing up a corn dog. Honestly, that's my biggest.
Well, that's her. She loves corn dogs.
So thinking through this a little more, like, do you think is the distance sort of just a feature maybe of scale, or is it? Do you think something that we've become reliant upon physiologically?
Like anything, I think there's a mix of different factors. I mean, and a big factor is the distance with the scale of civilization, right? Like it's harder and harder to get out and see nature. You can, obviously in a lot of places, and Texas probably not being the best one, go out to public parks and things like that. We have some great public parks here in the state, but not always close by, depending on what part of the state you live in. You do have the opportunity to do it. You just have to have the time, and I don't think many people make that time to do it. So that keeps them kind of shielded from what happens in the rural areas, right? Because especially in Texas, the rural areas are the thing you drive to go to the other city, right? We have Dallas, Austin, San Antonio, Corpus, Houston, nothing but, pine trees or mesquite, depending on which way you go in between, but not people stopping in those places, really just driving through, which I think leads to its own kind of danger, because you can feel like you touch those spots, especially when you drive through them. If you go to like one of those little boutique cities and spend a weekend, you can feel like, oh, like I've been out there, I know what that's like. But you saw a movie release version of it, right? Like you were in a Hallmark movie, you didn't see what actually happens out there on the day to day. You didn't live it, and it's not possible for everybody to do that. What is possible is to spend some time learning and understanding it.
Yeah, and I think about a little through my own like kind of personal journey, and I wonder too, and we can talk about this in just a second, but like the thought and concept of like, does access to public lands increase one's access to different types of food if you're seeking your sort of journey of procurement yourself? And I know like you said, growing up in Texas, there's not a lot of public land to go out for people to hunt. Same in growing up in parts of Oklahoma where I did as well. It was not there. It was available, but it was not as common, and not everybody accessed it. And I think about it too from a perspective, like I lived in DC for a year, and I hunted over in Maryland primarily. And so to find the first close piece of like huntable public land, I had to drive 40 minutes outside of town. And that was from like the middle of DC out. So like that commitment unto itself, especially like if you live in the western part of the US or a lot of places where like 40 minutes is not a big drive. Like some people drive that to go to the grocery store. But that concept of going from like a very complex place where everything is within a short distance, that increases that like that scale and feature of distance to be like, all right, I want to go out, I want to go forage mushrooms, I want to go fishing, I want to go hunting, I want to go do whatever. I've got to now get in my car, I've got to leave the city, a place of sort of like convenience and even distraction too, because intent is shrouded in the veil of distraction, I would say, and the ability to like go out and do certain things. And so to get out there to that distance often became like, oh God, like I gotta drive out, which knowing full and well, like my intent was I wanted to go out and enjoy it. I wanted to go hunting. I wanted to go do whatever. And so I think it's an interesting concept when we start talking about even just like physical distance, not just separation from a place or a thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I remember seeing one funny thing, because I think a lot of people want it. A lot of people don't make the time to do it. And it reminds me of, I think I saw it on Facebook or something one time, but it was just like a little note that was, it said something along the lines like, if, Tinder, the dating app, if it was like, if everybody went hiking that put they love hiking in their Tinder bio, can you imagine how packed the trails would be?
Yeah, right.
It's such a common thing that people like, oh, I love hiking. I went twice last year,
Yeah.
But even things like that, like it's inconvenient enough that people don't do the things they even like as much as they wish they could.
Now, do you think, let me ask you this, and this is kind of like not a slightly opposing question, but just a further examination. Do you think there's like an ethical upside to the distance? Maybe like efficiency, safety, access if people don't have it?
An ethical upside to having the distance?
Mm-hmm. To being a very involved participant.
I don't think so. I think it only leads to moral downside, because it doesn't. If you don't know the cost, you don't know how to treat the item, right? Like, for instance, if somebody gave you a piece of artwork, and I'm not an art person, that's much more my wife, and told you nothing about it, you might go, oh, that looks interesting, and you throw it in a closet. But if somebody be like, hey, this is $1 million Van Gogh, you're going to treat it a lot differently because you know the cost, right? Like, I know that's a kind of a silly, analogy, but it just to make the point, the further you get removed from what the cost is to have what you have, really the more unappreciative, the more wasteful, or the less you might take care of it, right? Like, there's nothing, I think, good that necessarily comes from being just a participant without knowing the cost.
Looking at responsibility and the moral accountability of it, and we're still, like, just to remind all the listeners, we're still on the concept and thought of death and consumption of food. So keep that lens in mind. But you present the argument of, like, moral responsibility follows the act, not the proximity. Can you unpack that a bit for me?
Yeah, because one of the things I said earlier was going and watching an animal get butchered, right? Like, your hands aren't literally getting bloody. You're removed from the act of everything that's happening, but you're absolutely aware of the cost because it's happening in front of you. And I don't think there's any devalue in that, right? I think seeing something happen like that, that's brutal and violent and can very much be tough to watch, because there's things tough for me to watch, right? Like, I've been out there where there's been cattle in pen, and we take a rifle, pop them in the head to take them out and clean them. Like, it doesn't feel great, right? But it doesn't feel any different because I didn't pull the trigger myself. So I think the proximity is irrelevant as long as you can see the cost of it yourself. I think that's the important takeaway for it, is knowing absolutely what happens and knowing what it means to have whatever that food is on your plate and what it is and how it got there.
Yeah, man. I think about, like, one of those, I would say it was a very interesting moment, kind of like growing up, because I grew up very much the same way. So, like, hunting a lot, seeing animals butchering, participating in that, doing it sort of myself. But I remember being in college, and it was like one of my last months in college, and one of my friends' brothers I was close with their family, and they wanted to celebrate it. And he's like, hey, you want to do, let's do, like, some sheep or goat or whatever. And I was like, okay, cool, sounds good. And so we were in New Orleans. We got in, we drove out of town to this goat farm, goat and sheep farm. And he's like, all right, like, pick which one you want. And we're, like, walking in the field, like, petting the sheep and the goat and all this. And I was like, I don't know, like, whichever one looks good. Like, I don't know. And he's talking to the guy, and they're trying to figure it out. And so they take one, and we lead one into this little shed with this wooden plywood table. It's framed out in, like, 2x4s and 2x6s, and it's dark and a little, dim in there, maybe a little dusty. And the guy bleeds the goat up on the table and just cuts its throat right there. And for me, in that moment, despite my participation in this process for years and years and years, was just, I remember being, like, emotionally struck, like, whoa, like, was not expecting that in that current moment, like, oh, this is very much different. And then kind of, watching that animal die. And it was just like, oh, okay. And then that kind of, like, led a different conversation. There's a regret in this story too, which ties into sort of this moral accountability. So we went back and we prepared this goat, and, like, we stewed it. We made big pots of stew, and we had friends over in the party. And at the end of it, there was, like, leftovers, a fair amount, more than I can consume, more than the other, my friends could consume and all that. And he's like, hey, what do you want to do with it? And I was like, I don't know. Like, I don't know what we do with this amount of food. Like, I don't know who to give it to. I don't know. And I just kind of, like, left it as, like, his problem, and kind of, like, floated away with my friends on to the next thing. And in that sort of, like, moment, if you roll back everything of, like, holy crap, like, I participated in this act. I chose death for what we framed earlier as, like, this energy transfer. I became very much the participant of it, and then I just let it go. I didn't follow through on that sort of like what I perceive now as like a moral accountability to be like, man, holy smokes, I should have probably like better steward the end result and played more of a hand in seeing to the consumption of that food that I chose.
Yeah, and I think that's important, and that's at the end of the day, that's the main takeaway I want people to have from the book, right? Is to understand the cost so they can understand what they have on their plate, right? And take better care of it. Because when I grew up, we always deer hunted, but my family was not great at cooking deer meat. We made chicken fried backstrap, and then we ground everything else into burger and sausage, and that was just what everybody did until I started trying to figure out like how to cook the other cuts on a deer. Even then, knowing that's how we did it, I grew up watching them leave rib meat. I grew up, it was 50-50 on if they would actually cut the neck meat off. They would leave it on the carcass. A lot of the time, and not necessarily to their own fault. I don't think they knew any better. It was just like, oh, that's tough. It'll clog up the grinder, or what have you. But that was kind of how I grew up watching things, and that probably played a little bit into like wanting to not waste. Was watching that growing up and kind of reflecting one day and being like, yeah, we left a lot of pounds of deer meat, in the ground somewhere that we could have utilized, and we didn't. And I didn't understand it at the time, which again, as a child, it's much harder to make those connections in your mind. You're still learning and developing. But yeah, very similar.
Now, let me ask you this from like the perspective of a hunter, and we can kind of talk through this collectively both, but like, do you think as hunters, are we more ethical, or maybe are we just more aware?
No, I think there's a spectrum of humans, and all of them always think they're right about everything. I don't think we're more ethical by any stretch of the imagination. I think that we are definitely more aware than most, kind of tribal type people, and because we are two, right, hunters gang together, and we do the same things that everybody else does. But we're more aware because we're closer to the cost. I will definitely say that. But from a moral standpoint, I mean, if you look at vegan arguments for least harm and stuff like that, like in their mind, they're trying to be the most ethical they can be, and cause, if you look into like Buddhism and stuff like that, I mean, that's really where they're trying to go and try to do the least amount of suffering that they can get out of their life. I think they're a little misguided in some of their beliefs. Some of them, right? Some of them aren't. But that doesn't make one side more ethical than the other, in my mind.
Yeah, I think I tend to agree with you on that. I think just as you represent the general population across the board in a lot of things, as our rating of ethicalness, I can think of numerous examples of like, just because you're a hunter doesn't mean you're ethical. It's really your approach to hunting. And I think hunters tend to look a lot more into, and maybe this is within, I don't think it's within more modern times. I think throughout the thing, like hunting's has been viewed in a couple different lenses. Like one is a point of recreation, two is a point of, providing food and sustenance, and three is like a way to sort of manage resources. And I think if you look at it through those three lenses, there's ethical fault and gain in each one. And I think that's just something we kind of have to manage as we look at ourselves as humans. But I think each one has a varying degree of awareness that's really important. But when we looked at people who look at it from a food resource aspect, I think they become more aware of their role in that, because it becomes a resource, and it's like, how do I maximize? And through that, like we touched earlier, is like that comes from experience and education as well, of like, I very much grew up the same way, like steaks, maybe some roast, maybe some ground, but a lot of stuff, went to snack sticks or jerky or things like that. Right. Like, are we maximizing our sort of like take on food from this when we talk about the definition of death versus what we're taking in, which is actually the perfect segue into looking at sort of your concept of moral math, which like can you help frame that a bit, and what are we actually measuring?
Yeah, so at the end of the day, I think like the one line approach to it is like kill count per calorie, right? Like that's the easiest mathematical way to kind of break this down is try to have the least amount of death per calorie consumed. Like you're a heat engine, you need a certain amount of calories to sustain life.
Okay.
Right, so the only, in my mind, logical way to look at it is to have the least amount of death to get to that calorie count, which, I mean, there's some things I love in hunting that kind of ruins, right? Like I spend a lot of time in South Texas. I love dove hunting.
Yeah.
You know, that's a high kill count per mill there. You know?
Yeah, holy smokes.
So to kind of look at things through that lens, and by no means I'm not asking anybody to be perfect, and frankly I don't necessarily want to be perfect either, right? Like I love dove hunting and I love eating dove, and I've got some great recipes from my time in South Texas that you don't see a lot, like dove gasada and some things like that. Everybody's I always grew up on the popper, right? Like everybody has the dove poppers. They have so many dove down there, they had to think of whole new ways to cook them, I think.
Yeah. But like, so to just throw the numbers out there, so 298 calories, that's for a whole dove. So it'd be like if you cook and ate everything, 33 grams of protein, 18 grams of fat, a high amount of iron, which is interesting. But but what you're saying is like, holy smokes, that's like for one death, that's really low.
Yeah, absolutely. When you think in terms of beef, and how many total calories you can get from a full-grown steer, that
when you
really
think about even deer itself, 130 to 150 calories per 3-ounce serving, and you think about 3 ounces. If we just rounded it to 4 and just lean on the high end, like 4 ounces, what is that? That's a quarter of a pound. And so if you pull 60 pounds off a deer, I refuse to do public math, but yes, everybody gets the concept. I'm not going to embarrass myself here today.
No, I'm not bad at math, but I wasn't about to spit out a number either.
Yeah, I have to take off my shoes and count on my toes. So, yeah, when you look at it from that perspective, so like it becomes very interesting because then we start to parallel sort of, if we look at it from the hunting world, going out, if you're truly like looking for resources and you're looking at it from like a nutritional lens, like you should be like one elk hunt a year, or like one buffalo hunt, or like you're going really bang for the buck. Yeah,
that's and it's important to note too, right? Like there's always the argument not everybody can hunt, not everybody could eat this way either, and it's not asking everybody to eat a certain way. It's again just try to start the conversation to reduce where you can. But yeah, really the probably lowest kill count you could ever do would be a buffalo, growing your own vegetables in your backyard. And honestly, kind of leaving more towards like a carnivore style diet lifestyle where you're getting more calories from meat and fat. Just to, depending on how much area you have to actually grow and using growing techniques to where you can actually grow a lot of vegetables and growing, rapidly ripe vegetables and things like that. So you can, make up for the footprint you're growing them in. But that probably is kind of the least amount of kills per meal that you can get. And that's not achievable for everybody.
Yeah, no. Another question I had, so there's a limited number of elk in North America.
Right.
But we talk about like one elk being sort of a kill count. And then if you harvest one elk, you're now depleting that resource from the environment holistically. If we looked at the example of dove, where there's like, I don't know, millions of dove in North America. And so if you go and you harvest, like, as we look at moral math from a different standpoint of like, you see like kind of what I'm trying to get at is like adding another factor into it of like the number of availability versus the number of kill count. And I think that goes kind of a little outside what you're presenting, but it's an interesting thought.
No, it is. But I think it's important to also talk about there's so many factors that go into all this, right?
Yeah.
Like, and that's where, you can argue like taking the elk, right? Like you can argue one, like population control is incredibly important to all game species that we have in the North American model of conservation. We, people try to bring in predators, but at the end of the day, humans control population better than any everything we can, and we can't let nature just take care of nature, because we've destroyed nature with the expansion of our civilization, right? It's not natural anymore. We can't depend on nature to take care of nature, because we have disrupted the natural flow. So that requires us to be the ones in the driver's seat to control it. So between that and population control and all the ecology side, that and then the financial side with how much hunters pay for, retention of parks and all that kind of stuff. There's so many different aspects that you really are never going to be able to nail down exact numbers or exactly what's right, wrong, or what's best or better. It's just there's too much to look at. Even if you look at some of the studies where they've done like death in farming and harvesting, they don't know either, right? Like in some papers, they're like, we didn't include these animals because they perished due to not having cover from predators after the harvest. Like, well, hold on, why is that not applicable, right?
Yeah,
like it's still it's not maybe directly applicable, but they would have had cover had we not harvested that field, but like those were removed from that count. So like even from the scientific standpoint, they tend to not actually have great data because it's such a complex topic and there's not enough research through it to really nail down what we need to know to nail everything down, if we even can.
This is a great conversation. I'm enjoying this very much.
Me too.
It's very. I'm gonna have to go take a mental break before I go to work this morning and be like, oh gosh, I gotta relax a little bit. Let's move a bit from theory and focus on application, because I want folks to kind of walk away with where.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
From your perspective, what does this honest eating look like? And we've talked a little bit. We've teased it out, but just to lay it out very plain. What does that look like?
Being aware of the cost of your food in one line, right? I was going to tell this story a little earlier. Like I had a great friend of mine growing up where I remember vividly within an hour of each other, we put a pig in a pen. There was we grew up in FFA, show pig, and we shot it.
Woo!
Always support FFA.
Yep.
But we killed this pig, we cleaned it, we put it in got it all processed out, and then about an hour after we were done, we saw this. We were watching TV and saw one of the hunting shows. This was back in the early 2000s. Saw this huge buck, and he was like, "Man, I just could never bring myself to shooting a high fence buck." And I was like, "Well, we just pinned a pig in a pen. You had no problem shooting that one." But to him, that high fence buck was morally wrong, and for some reason the pig was not as much, which I thought was always very interesting, but I don't think he put the thought into it, right? So I think the key, again, that I want everybody to take away from this is put thought into what your food actually cost, right? Like actually think it through. Actually look at it, look at the root from where it comes from and what it costs to get to you. And that would be the biggest thing you can do, right? Because, like I said, the best way to probably eat is killing very large animals, which they have a higher tax on the environment too, right? If we had to raise them, reach out to your local rancher, get a quarter of beef, a half of beef, whatever your family needs. Try to get together and split it with a friend. Some of these farms that have like vegetable boxes and stuff like that, support your local farmer. The cost from them to the environment is usually much less than these larger farms owned by some of the big meat manufacturers. And then, if you got room and you got a way to do it, try to grow some of your own vegetables, try to grow your own, think in terms of calorie density if you have limited space, and try to consider what you can do to drop the deaths on your plate.
No, that's great. As we kind of close out here, because we're coming up on time, and I want to tie a nice little bow around this. One sort of last question I had for you was sort of, after writing this book and really composing and organizing all your thoughts, has your own behavior changed? Have you changed your own patterns?
I would say probably not afterwards, but I would say, research during the book certainly made me kind of rethink, because that was, another one we talked about earlier is thinking about in terms of chicken wings, right? But then when I started thinking in terms of dove, I was like, oh man,
Dang it.
So research and had me thinking. One thing we didn't hit on is what deaths count, right? Like I kind of say in the book, there's wherever the line that a death matters to most people tends to live somewhere between a bunny and a mosquito. And I don't know where that line is, even for myself personally. I think it probably changes depending on my feelings for that day. It's always above a mosquito. I hate mosquitoes. I live on the Gulf Coast.
Yes.
But, some people, they don't think twice about a rat. Some people watch Ratatouille. There's the line is somewhere for everybody, and that kind of drives a lot of these base numbers in that moral math model. What deaths count and which ones don't. Because if you talk about killing insects as a death count, well, then vegetable farming is not in a good place, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So I'd say that has probably kind of changed, or like I've struggled with the most, is really trying to figure out and put, like, I'm a very literal, logical person, so trying to put a line of where that is, I've really struggled with, and I still haven't come to terms of exactly where that is. Like, what's okay to kill without thought, and what do you need to, like, kind of maybe care about? I know emotionally,
that's a grad thesis waiting to be written.
I know emotionally where I kind of land, but again, it depends on the day. Sometimes I'm mad at a rat, and sometimes I'm not. So it kind of, if it's in your house, it's a real pain, and you're ready to kill it. If it's getting 4 of them ran over by a hay cutter, then you're like, oh, that sucks. So it just depends.
This plays in such to modern times in my household. So I was outside, I'm like pulling grass and doing yard work yesterday, and my son's out there with his Nerf gun. I was like, what are you doing? He's like, oh, I'm like trying to shoot this bird with my Nerf gun. And I was like, all right, this is the moment, time to be a dad and educate on, like, responsibility. I was like, look, man, we don't shoot things, we don't shoot animals we don't eat. Right. And exactly to that, he's like, what about bugs? And I was like, well, bugs are different sometimes. I guess it really just depends on the bug, right? But even in my conversation of, like, he checked me on my own morality, and I'm just like, dang, okay, well, I don't know, because there's some bugs I don't want you killing. Some bugs are okay, but, why? It's this whole concept, too, of, like, what makes a weed? What makes, we could dive philosophically down this for hours. Man, holy smokes. What a great conversation. And I appreciate the way you've presented all this and written it. Like, it's very thought-provoking, and I think it's something that a few people get a little squirmy to discuss, but it's very much should be a prominent conversation. Where can people find your book?
For right now, for the next, roughly 85 days on Amazon exclusively.
Okay.
And then it'll have a wider distribution after that.
Okay, cool.
It'll kind of be on your own, whatever bookstore you like. And then hopefully within the next 30 days, an audiobook will be out, because I know people really love audiobooks.
Nice. Are you narrating it?
My wife's trying to talk me into it.
You should do it. It'll be great.
That's what she says. Everybody likes the author narrating.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're the person that can put the most emphasis on the proper syllables and things like that.
Well, yeah, I feel articulate sometimes. Yeah. I just have this horrible memory. I used to run a phone app called Angler that it was like for booking fishing guides, and it never quite took off. But I had to do the commercials for it, and when you're trying to, like, read something, I realized, like, voiceovers and stuff like that, I was, like, horrible at it. Like, hey guides, welcome today. Damn it. Yeah. And it took me an hour and a half to get through, like, a paragraph, so we'll see.
Yeah. It's well, I wish you luck on that. Yes, I've done my own challenges with trying to record audio and stuff too, so I totally get it. But as we look, so who's your target audience? Who should be the one to pick up your book and really read it?
Everybody. I mean, I purposely, the book probably leans more towards hunting, and it's not a defense on hunting. But I named it and had the cover designed in a way that it's more, it's also appealing to a wider audience and vegans. It's number 1 in animal rights on Amazon right now. It's number 1 in hunting right now.
Cool.
On the Amazon ebook store, and just a big fan. It's 4 places above Steve Rinella's American Buffalo, which was the first thing I texted my wife when I saw that. But if it'll stay there, I don't know. But it's doing well, and those are kind of the 2 outlets that I wanted to hit the most, because I think they have the most in common. Yeah. And I think both sides could really enjoy it.
You created a bridge between the 2.
That's the attempt.
Maybe one day we'll uncomfortably hold hands with each other. And
We'll see.
Yeah. No, like I said, thanks for this. This is righteous. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah. Everybody, please go grab a copy of Blake's book. So the full title is On the Ethics of Killing, The Moral Math of Eating. And as he mentioned, you can find it on Amazon. Hopefully we'll see it in bookstores here soon. It will be awesome. So thanks everybody for listening. Appreciate the patience, the understanding, and the commitment. And please, whatever podcast platform you're listening to, punch that 5-star button. Leave us a review. Tell us we're doing right, or tell us we're doing wrong. Thanks everybody. Have a good day.
This podcast is brought to you by Carvana. Selling your car should feel like one less thing on your list, not one more. With Carvana, it is. Just go to Carvana.com, enter your license plate or VIN, and get a real offer down to the penny. No back and forth, no surprises, just an experience you can trust. Like your offer? Accept it. Schedule pickup, and we'll come to you with a check in hand. Your car, your timeline, your terms. Visit Carvana.com to sell your car today.
Carvana.
Pickup fees may apply.